Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hi, and welcome back to Beyond This. This part of our journey today is about our book club of the month. A friend of mine, Fims, recently recommended this book to me. It's called Homescar by Saliha Banji. And I think the reason she initially recommended it was that it's a South African author, somebody from our community, and she thought an easy enough read and we would get through it. So it was a lot more than an easy read. It was heavy, packed with so many things that needed to be discussed. And it brought up so many conversations that I thought it's actually a book I would love to recommend for other people to read. But I brought in the right person to chat to you about it as well. My friend Nabilah Mayet-Cassim has got her own podcast called Blended Books, and you'll often see me reposting book recommendations from her. She's my go-to person for the best of books, and she'll honestly always say to me, this one may be a bit difficult to get into, but once you're through it, you've got it, or this one's skippable. But if you want to know anything about the authors and things behind the authors, you just need to log onto her podcast called Blended Books, and she'll tell you everything you know about the authors. Right here, we're just going to be discussing the books and unpacking that. Nabilah, assalamu alaikum and welcome to the studios.
Walaikum salam, and thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
Awesome. So I have to ask you about this book because there were so many aspects of it that there's no way you can just put this book down and not discuss it. And without giving too much away to everyone, I think there were themes in there that were huge. I mean, it started off immediately with this discussion on sexual abuse. And I recently sat at a table and it came up in general conversation with so many women our age just saying, oh, but I remembered I went through something like this and I remembered. And I was so taken aback as to how casually this conversation was brought up because it's kind of triggered and brought up so much for so many people who've kind of been told all these years, don't discuss it, it's fine, it's not that serious, it wasn't more than that, it's just what it is.
Exactly, you're being dramatic, you're overreacting. And just to add to that, more often than not, it's somebody that you know, somebody that's close to you. And so that's where sort of the difficulty comes.
Yes.
With other family members are like, but it's my brother, or it's my this, or it's my that. So he could not have done that. But when you say, sorry, Zaya, when you say the book was hard to put down, it really was. And I know I shared this with you before, when I started it, and I mean, a lot of that comes in from the get-go. I literally closed the book. I put it in my drawer as if it didn't, because it was just a lot to process. And then I processed it for a while, thought about it. It brought up a lot of sadness, a lot of, because even though it's not a real character, it's happened to a lot of real characters in our lives.
But that's exactly it. So, you mentioned earlier about that it's usually related. And I remember having this discussion with Dr. Shaida Umar, and she said, when it comes to sexual abuse and that in the communities, it's very often, over 90% of the time, it's someone you know, it's someone you trust. Yes. It's, I'm a paranoid mother. I don't allow sleepovers and that for these very reasons, because you think you know families, you think, oh, my child will be safe, but you have no idea what's happening in someone's home or the type of personalities we open our children up to. And I think, like you're saying, if we had to ask our viewers, like just to a show of hand, if you have been abused, if you know someone who's been abused, if you've been exposed to a story of someone who's asked you for help, almost everyone will raise their hands, because there isn't a person that you can't say, I've never heard of it, I don't think it exists, it's not in our community. And why I do love how brave she was to raise that is because we've so often been just push it under the carpet for the sake of izzat, for the sake of reputation. What will people say? We're way past that, because this what will people say has ended up leaving generations of people with trauma. And then now if you speak about it, people are like, why are you only bringing it up now?
Yeah, exactly. I like the word abuse is very, it's a big word. It's a big word to unpack. It's a big word to talk about, to think about. And often people don't think abuse happened to them. And I always say, if it made you feel uncomfortable, then there's a level of, your boundaries being taken down. And okay, I wouldn't say abuse in every situation, but if it makes you feel uncomfortable, then there's something there. So then you shouldn't be told to just push it under the rug. Oh no, it's this person loves you, they care about you. And then it brings me to the next point of asking or telling our children, go and greet this one. Why don't you want to give him a hug or give this person a hug, or he wants to give you a kiss? And in my home, that's a firm rule. If my child doesn't want to greet you or give you a hug or give you a kiss, that's absolutely fine.
And that's
and it's not disrespect.
Yes, because you can make salam, but you don't have to do the hugging and the kissing and getting people into your proximity. And generally, not everyone, I'm a very, I'll always touch my friends, but not everybody likes that. Not everybody wants to be held or hugged. And you've got to have respect for that kind of boundaries as well.
I mean, I see it with my kids. I've got one child who is very affectionate. She loves hugs. She loves to be touched. And then the other two, not very much. You have to ask them, can I give you a hug? Can I give you a kiss? And sometimes they'll say, no, I don't want a hug. I don't want a kiss. And that's okay.
And that's perfectly
fine. That's okay.
Fine.
They do not have to be something that they're not, or be given something that they don't want to be given.
So when you spoke about if it affects your boundary, if it's something that makes you uncomfortable, and for me, it's exactly that. We stop listening to our instincts because we have this need to be correct or politically correct all the time and not offend anyone. So even if we know we're in a situation or a setting and you're just uncomfortable, you don't want to be standing there, we seldom leave because we try and talk about ourselves out of how we offend other people rather than actually talking to protecting our own space and self and sanity.
That's it. And it is a fine line because on the one hand, you don't want to be rude. You don't want to just leave a setting. But on the other hand, what will the long-term effects be if you stay? And that's a big thing, not just for you, because you mentioned generational trauma. Trauma like this sits with you and then it moves down the generation. So even though the abuse, and I put it in inverted commas, didn't happen to a person, it could have happened to their mother or their father or their grandparents, but that sort of goes down as generational trauma and everybody suffers those consequences.
And that's what we saw in the book, because as much as she thought it was that isolated episodes, actually wasn't even isolated, but we saw it affect how she saw herself, how she ended up dealing with relationships, how it affected every part of who she was going long term. And for me, I was so glad that the author was so authentic in not just dismissing that in the story.
Absolutely. And it's hard, like you said, it's hard topics to talk about. And when I did have a chat with Salia, she just said to me, as long as you're being true to yourself and you're giving your truth and what you're writing about is your truth and you're comfortable with that. Because I did say to her, in our community, because we're in a very small knit community, very close-minded, that was my question to her. And she said, I'm true to myself. I don't have anybody to apologize to. I don't think I'm doing anything that anyone can feel offended by. This is what is happening. And as long as in my heart, I know that I'm doing what I feel needs to be done, I'm happy.
And I think she has done that because I think she's given so many people. And I think the one thing we must note is that sexual abuse is happening to boys and girls within our community. It's not just to females. But what she's done is she's opened up a platform for discussions to say that even that was never going to be okay. And so many people said to me that I thought back about something that happened to me, but because it wasn't rape, I thought, okay, no, I don't need to say anything about it. And it was fine. And only after reading this, you realize, actually, none of that would ever be okay. But even in the book, her not being able to say anything to her mom, like that tightness and that fear, I thought so many people would hear this and actually understand why it was something that would never be able to just say, this isn't okay.
It's exactly. And this is what happened to me. And more often than not, we blame ourselves, right? With everything, we blame ourselves. I brought it on myself. And we see that a lot with the character as well, that did I do something? Or mommy said I mustn't be naughty, or I can't be disrespectful to elders. So I need to do what the elders say, whether it's inappropriate or not. And at that age, children don't know what is appropriate and not appropriate, which is another thing, is teaching our children those boundaries from when they're young. Talking about things that are normally taboo, in the sense of your body is yours, and nobody's allowed to, talk about it or do anything around it that you're not comfortable with, because it's yours.
Absolutely. And I think you've just touched on something for me that's also important in terms of how we praise and the words that we use to praise children. Because it's, oh, you're a good girl. Okay, now I need to be a good girl. If I do that, then it means I'm a good girl. Yes. And I've heard my parents say that. So you associate that action with being a good person. And I always remember that when we were studying in our courses, we were always told, you be very specific in praise, good listening, good movement, good pencil grip, whatever it is, but be specific in what you're praising, not an overall good girl or good boy, because you have no idea what it's being associated with.
And how it translates to the child. The same thing with, we'll tell a girl, you're so beautiful, all the boys are going to go crazy for you. But
and we think that's okay.
We think that's okay, and it's not, and they think that's their worth. Whereas with a boy, we'll never say that. We'll never say, comment on their looks. We'll talk about something else.
My goodness.
You're so strong or whatever. So,
and that could unpack an entire thing on how we actually teach value in children. Is it just physical? Is it just in their bodies? And then we want to know why these cultural perceptions remain, because we're doing that even in our words.
We're doing it, and as modern and as evolved as we've become, there's still certain things that maybe are traditional, that happen maybe not in our homes directly or from another family member or an elderly, because it comes.
Absolutely.
These little things, and there's certain things maybe we do or say that also is not correct, but we've been brought up with it.
But it comes back down to being conscious of how we parent. So I want to go back, because with Nabilah, as you can see, there's a million things we always unpack from any book. But coming back to Homescar, there were a few other things in that. Like, I felt it was a whole world that I didn't even know existed. I do feel certain parts of me were very sheltered, but I could relate to hearing stories of my friends that I thought, whoa, this was actually very real for many, many women in that time. Mm-hmm. But just from relationships, what was okay, what isn't okay. I see some of those biases still prevalent in our community in terms of if someone doesn't look like us, if someone doesn't sound like us, where do we place them if that's where our children want to end up? Mm-hmm. And I want to ask you about that. But also what was huge for me, and I see still prevalent today, was other families. Whether it was an extramarital affair or it was a marriage, it doesn't really allude to that. It just speaks about the father having another life separate from them. But how many women carry that pain? Because we almost saw her mum becoming a fraction of the strength of this woman that we first saw.
Mm-hmm. Again, like I said, with this book, there were many moments that I just put it down because it touched on so many things that we see in our communities. But again, the things that we don't see, maybe because we were sheltered. We look at her relationship at 17 when she meets Harith, I think it is, was very different to what she is. And I mean, we're talking about apartheid. So firstly, she wasn't allowed to be seeing someone that was colored, who was multiracial. And the way he talked, the way he dressed, everything was very different. And I think maybe that was his appeal to her, is because she needed that escape. But again, it's what makes us say that that's wrong versus what is right, even though that relationship was frowned upon at that time. But I don't think much has changed. I think even now we tend to stick to what we know, which is not that's not wrong. It's just we're also conditioned in a certain way to think
we have our biases.
Yes, that can't be with somebody from this. Even in our Indian communities, you can't be somebody from this. And yes, it is going away, but still, there's still a lot of it there. Then when you talk about the secrets, like the extramarital affairs and the second families, and again, that is something that we've been sheltered from, but you hear it from people that you may know, people that you may have heard of, and it happens, and you just wonder, at the end of the day, it's the woman, and maybe I'm being biased because I am a woman, but it's the woman that then becomes a fraction of who she was. And then because her mum, Asma, who's our main character, her mum was going through all of this, a lot of the time she was just so oblivious to what Asma was going through, because she was going through so much on her own. And that's why I think platforms like this podcast, like spaces for women to be able to talk about what they're going through, is so important, because she kept it all in. She suffered through this thing in her head, and then her daughter got neglected. Like I said, it then goes back to the generational trauma, because it impacts.
But I think that summarizes it so well, because we forget our mothers, our fathers are just human beings.
Exactly.
And they're not faultless. They're also just walking that journey for the first time, encountering their own difficulties. But the book doesn't really touch on the dad's role in terms of, except coming in more as an authoritarian figure. Mm-hmm. But you're right, in terms of the mum just taking on so much that she forgot her relationship with her child, because what did she have? Where was her support network? Who helped her through that? And this thing of us just sweeping it under the carpet consistently,
all the time.
It's like toppling
Yes,
over at
that's
this
it.
point.
And that's what happened to her. And when you say the father was, and he was that he just came in, barked orders, and that was his role. And in that time, which is around the 1970s that the book is set, that's what it was. Dads didn't have that role of being caregivers or playing a role
in
their children's lives. I don't think they ever sat and said, "How was your day?"
Or the impact of what they've done and the ripple effects of that, because men do generally can compartmentalize relatively better than we can.
Yes.
And I think men were just meant to be providers. If they provided the home, they provided the finances, you were looked after. There was no emotional aspect. And that's a whole discussion, because I think it's been very neglected for men. And we will talk about how we don't have those spaces for men, for how much they have to go through. And that's another whole discussion on its own. But where to from there, and how does that generational trauma then stop? Because there's so many women who I think would relate to this isolated parenting, having to do it on their own, having to take the responsibility, doing drastic things to try and save their reputation or save their daughter, whether it was for her sake or for everyone else's sake, but to be known as a good mother without actually anyone asking, are you okay in yourself? Exactly. Are you okay as a human being? Are you okay functioning every single day?
And who's to say what a good mother is? It's different for everybody. It's different for every child, for every mother. So that's the thing. We've got this box that a mother's supposed to fit into, and not everybody fits into that box. But does that make them a bad mother? I don't think so.
Absolutely.
So that's, again, another topic for another day. There's a lot that we've unpacked. But when you say where to from here, there's so much we can do. There's always so many answers. There's so many things you can do. But the best we can do is just one step at a time, one day at a time. So I feel our generation has come we've come so far from previous generations, but maybe too far. I'm coming to realize there is something as too much. We've over-psychologized, if that's even a word, the way that we parent, the way that we think, the way that we do. But that's okay. Because it's just like in the book, how it was set in apartheid, just like how we had to come back from apartheid and almost go the other way, where we had systems which would give people that were not privileged in apartheid to get opportunities. It's the same in that way. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, because we have done it to a point where maybe we've overdone it with our children, but that's okay, because there was so much that was underdone before that we needed to almost come to the end of this. And I think as the generations go, and as we teach our children and they teach their children, inshallah, there'll be a time when we'll reach some sort of equilibrium, and we'll reach some point where we'll prioritize our mental health as women and as men, and then always the Quran and the Sunnah, right? Anytime you're in doubt, just go back. Just go back to that.
So I think, you mentioned such a pertinent point about how we've overcycled. I don't even know if that's a word, but we've overdone that for our children. But we haven't actually still done that for ourselves. Like, there are so many women that we know, and you can see the heaviness that they carry. And we've discussed this in a previous podcast as well, in terms of the triggers that are coming up now. But it's almost like, if you're not going to fix it now, we just create more trauma. So yes, we do right by our kids, but we also have to do right by ourselves. We have to fix things for ourselves. We have to come to a place of peace and calm for ourselves, so that we can sit back and go, okay.
We've also come so far.
And
that's such a good point that you bring up. And I think that a big thing with that is we've been conditioned, because we also come from a different generation to our kids. So there's a lot of conditioning that happened with, again, what's it like to be a good girl, a good mom, a good wife, a good all of that. We never talk about what's it like to be good to ourselves. So that's the first thing. So a lot of, and I say therapy, a lot of CBT, the cognitive behavioral therapy will work, because it will help you rewire or rethink how you see yourself. But again, I always say, talk therapy doesn't work for anyone. And therapy doesn't have to be the scary thing where you don't even need to do it with somebody else. Gardening is therapy. writing. And Salia herself says that the reason she started writing was when she had her daughter many years ago, when she had postnatal depression. And, there's no time to have postnatal depression. You've got this baby, you've got your family, you have to carry on. But writing helped her. So it's gardening, it's writing, it could be art, it could be sitting by yourself without your electronics for 10 minutes. It could be grounding on the grass. I mean, I know I sound like a bit of a tree hugger here, but it could really be anything, cooking,
but
anything.
This is what you and I often have the discussion about, because somebody will say, oh, everyone must go for, I do believe we all need therapy, but therapy doesn't always look as conventional as we said, because we've often discussed this doesn't always work. This may not work for that person. It's also what you're open to. For someone like me, I'm really not comfortable sitting there telling somebody, because I know I'm always guarded to an extent. So I think, as you mentioned, you got to find what works for you. But just find ways to heal yourself.
Yes.
That's the bottom line.
And it's the therapy and it's the person. This is the other thing I say if someone is to ask me their advice, even if you are open to talk therapy or you are open to whatever other type of therapy, finding a therapist is also a bit like dating. You have to find somebody that gets you, that you feel comfortable with. If you don't feel comfortable, you're not going to be sharing anything. You're not going to get anywhere, and that's just money and time wasted. So again, when you look for a therapist, when you look for an outlet, whatever it is, it has to align with your values, with your soul, with what you want, with what you want to achieve. And again, it sounds like a lot of work, but it's not if you look at it as just, and I don't like this word either, self-care, because again, that's also been overused. But if you just look at self-care, that's all it is. You're just taking care of yourself.
And that's it. And we need to do it without the guilt. The time has flown by so fast. And now you can see why Nabilah will be a regular on this podcast. The conversations seldom just stick to the book, because it seldom is about the books. Books find you, and when they do, there's a story that needs to be told, and part of it will always be yours. Nabilah, last words on your take-home message or your rating, or why this is your book for the month.
There's a lot. I mean, but I think it's something that should be read. I will encourage you to go out and read it. If you'd like to get more information or learn more about the author, like Sarah said, you can tap into my podcast at Blended Books or on Instagram. But get a book like this that'll make you think, that'll take you out of your comfort zone. And I think that's also another part of getting better and being better, is doing something different, doing something that you never thought you would do. And I think when you read this book, you leave it thinking, what can I do that's so radical, that's so different, that will make me feel, or make me feel like I achieved something.
Awesome.
The other thing I'd like to leave it with is just think about something that you'd like to leave in this world, a part of you, whether it's a tree that you've grown, whether it's a recipe. It could be a book that you've written like Salia's. It could be anything good that you bring to the world that'll just make the world just a little bit better.
So when Nabilah came in, that's exactly how our conversation started on how do you want people to remember you when you're no longer here? Because you can do whatever you want and people will remember the bad as well, or you can leave something good and a legacy that people will hold on to. And I think that's so important, and a good way to end why writing could also be part of your healing as well. Book of the Month, Home Scar by Saliha Bamji. Let us know your thoughts. We're looking forward to hearing from you as well. That's today's show on Beyond This, because what comes next starts right here.